Thinking about social justice and the treatment of low-income communities? Wondering if the Bahamas can use a social justice communications lab like the Opportunity Agenda? Pause, think about it with intentional thought, and consider where we go from here. Stay tuned and hear what Professor Alan Jenkins got to say about how and what impact of rights equality engines have on affecting social change.
Something to think about with Dale Happy Knowles. What we think, we become. What we radiate, we attract. What we imagine, we surely can achieve. Let's change the narrative 242.
Enterprises and Page Investments and our friends have something to think about in this discussion here today. Via our post chats at the bottom of the screen. Let us know what you're thinking, what inspired you, and how you want us to proceed as we go for another 50 years post-independence. Can you believe the Bahamas is 50 years old? Wow. Welcome, Professor Jenkins. How are you today?
I'm well. Thanks for having me on, and a happy anniversary to the Bahamas. 50 years. It's amazing. I was there,
Awesome.
as you know, I was there for the original Independence Day, and fantastic to be back recently.
Awesome, 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 man. You have rights to be here, and it's good that you were able to be in your busy schedule to come and put your toes on this little rocks in the Bahamas so that we could have a true celebration for you. So sorry your mom isn't here with us, didn't make it this far, but we extend our condolences again, and I'm sure that she was dancing up there in the sky.
Yes,
somewhere.
she was
Yeah.
with us in spirit for sure. So thank you.
Yes. So the Opportunity Agenda highlights that communication and culture have the power to move hearts and minds in ways that facts and advocacy often cannot. We in the African heritage often act on the passions that is burning in us inside. Or we do not act on the passions that burn inside because we think that one man can make a difference. We find this particularly true in the mighty United States of America, even though there is a sea of examples to tell us different. We appreciate each of those movements required massive communication and cultural shift which involves multiple people and effort. But when we break it all down to the nuts and bolts, it still boils down to one man, one leader, person, or however we want to frame it, for our own specific purposes and desires. I tend to just use the word man to cover everybody, but please don't get offended by the word, as we say. But you are no different from these one people. You have paved the way that caused a lot of change. And I look at some of the pictures and heard what some of the people said about the Opportunity Agenda, etc. And my heart grows big because I can remember running around trying to, I wouldn't say steal, but at least pick my eyes to get a hold of your massive comic collection so I could read some of his books, and you hold those like they were Fort Knox. You wasn't supposed to touch them. But you've done exceptionally well, and we tend to agree with you. But you had no choice but to do these things because you have roots from Eleuthera, and Eleuthera incidentally means freedom. And we used to say these things are coincidences, but I tend to, as you get older, wonder if it is or something else. But knowing you had this in your heart from day one, you had no choice, as we said, that you had to do these things if you wanted your pillow to be soft in the night. Plus, you didn't want to lose your hearing. So, welcome again. And how do you agree with any of those comments just now?
Well, I do agree with it all, Happy. As you know, I come from a family of activists from Eleuthera, Palmetto Point, and Governor's Harbor, and Nassau, but also Philadelphia, and my dad from Detroit, and his parents from Georgia and the Deep South, all people who strove for greater opportunity and human rights, not just for themselves, but for other folks who maybe didn't have the same chance that they had or that we had. And so I was definitely raised with the idea, the values that you succeed for yourself, and you also need to give back and help other people to have the opportunities that you had. And I've tried to do my best to achieve that goal throughout my life.
Yes, well, you know, your record is showing that you did, because I mean, you accomplished some significant things here. You, and I would say former, I didn't say former once, but assistant to the Solicitor General of the United States of America's Department of Justice, Director of Human Rights at the Ford Foundation, Associate Counsel to the NAACP Legal Defense and Educational Fund, Law Clerk to U.S. Supreme Court Justice Harry A. Bachman and U.S. District Court Judge Robert L. Carter, formerly president of the and co-founder of the Opportunity Agenda, but now professor of practice at Harvard Law School, where you teach courses in race and law, communication, and Supreme Court jurisprudence. But most importantly, you're husband and father of 3 lovely ladies. You know, and we got to say those things, otherwise we can get in trouble. But that is true, not just words to you know, the ladies make the man, and so forth. And so, you know, when we look at all these things, you have already done in a whiff of your life, you know, because you can't be more than 30 good. And at time, even though we know we might double that or triple it sometime. But anyway, on this, and many more twice our age haven't even gotten out of the gate, working towards their passion. So when we look at this, we say surely, if the majority don't able to accomplish things, that must mean that it's not easy. And so by you accomplishing these things, we got to take off our hat to you, because we know that road could not be easy. But we would like to hear a little bit about some of the obstacles you might have had to overcome as you journey up that way, to help our people know that you can achieve whatever you put your mind to.
Yes, well, thank you. Yeah, I've been very fortunate. You know, a lot of doors were open to me. You know, going to law school, for example, I went to Harvard Law School, that were not open for people, Black folks, the generation before me. You know, I was able to go to Harvard Law School and fortunately do well. I clerked, as you said, on the Supreme Court. I was Justice Blackmun's first Black law clerk. He had never had one before in his 30 years on the court. You know, I was one of only a few Black folks at the Justice Department. I also had the opportunity to work at the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, which of course is an organization of Black folks and Black lawyers, and some of the best lawyers in the country. All of those experiences and my family upbringing helped to prepare me to fight the good fight, to really try to expand opportunity and protect the rights of the most vulnerable folks. And, you know, I would say, we were talking about, you know, my Bahamian roots. There are Bahamian Americans who have also paved the way for some of the things that I did, that I've been able to do. You know, W.B. Du Bois was of Bahamian descent, Bahamian grandfather. James Weldon Johnson, both of them co-founders of the NAACP, of Bahamian descent, and of course our late, you know, Bahamian hero, Sidney Poitier, from Cat Island, who came to the United States and excelled in acting and excelled in his activism, and was always trying to give back, and kind of combining culture and justice, which is also something that I've tried to do.
Yeah, that's awesome. And it's interesting that you mentioned some of these persons who might have even started in the Bahamas and move on to into the United States, maybe back in the days of the contract or even before, where there was this agreement between the Bahamas and America, where I think it was during the war when we sent people over there to farm lands and this and that and all that kind of stuff. But there's these saltwater um, railroads, underground railroads that were developed, and it allowed some more people to go in both directions. But that we could touch on those another day. But yesterday in the Bahamas we celebrated, or this is the day when we celebrate Emancipation Day in the Bahamas, 1834, and I think the United States was in 1836 or 8, somewhere around there. So that's one of the things where we finished before y'all. We did before y'all, but one
Yeah,
few
actually,
things.
long before slavery wasn't abolished across the United States until 1865.
Oh, 65. Sorry,
Yeah,
I'm getting my
yeah.
numbers backwards. Yeah, yeah. It's the dyslexic in me. All right. So tell us then, what drove this passion in you to be able to push in this direction?
Yeah, well, again, in addition to my upbringing, I was fortunate enough to get a great education and also exposed to the world enough to know that so many Black folks in the United States, kids, were not getting a quality education. Not
Mm-hmm.
only Black kids, also Latin American kids and Asian American kids, and some
Right.
poor white kids. So that was
Right.
my introduction to the reality that not everyone has the same opportunities, and that there are governmental decisions behind that, that the courses that are offered in predominantly Black schools were often inferior, that the teachers pay, that the funding for things like books, school books and classrooms and the like. And
Mm-hmm.
it made me angry. First you get mad and then you get going, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so that was the first thing I started working on as a young activist, was working to try to improve the educational opportunities specifically for Black folks. But once your eyes are open to the
Mm-hmm.
structural inequality and the policy decisions that have led to it, you begin to see the inequality in lots of places in our criminal
Okay.
justice system, for example, in our housing systems, in our
Mm-hmm.
immigration systems, where people are treated differently based on the color of their skin. And so I really began to work across those issues at the level of values, opportunity, human rights, the idea of community, that we're all in it together, that we're
Mm-hmm.
responsible for each other and for the common good. And so those are the values and the experiences that have driven me throughout my career.
Yes. And so when we look at that, I guess you had a blend between people and actually events that might have give you what we call a swift kick to say, okay, yeah, we want to do this, but now, boom, we're going to do this full fledged, straight, without any deviation. So how were you able to tap into that passion? What was able to point you in that direction to know how to draw on that passion so that you could become the Super Mario Mr. Hulk? Which one of us who you liked in cartoon?
Oh
The
yeah,
name?
the Incredible Hulk for sure.
The Incredible Hulk. Yeah.
One of my favorites. It really was a gradual development. I had the passion, but not the skills. And so, in between college and law school, I worked for a civil liberties organization. I worked with one of the great Black social psychologists of our time, a man named Kenneth Clark, who has since
Okay.
passed away. And that was what I majored in university, was social psychology. And so I began to pursue some of the pathways for greater justice there. Then I went to law school and I gained another set of skills and talents that I felt that I could use and that I had to use to try to make our country, the United States, a more fair place, and the world as well. And even after that, you mentioned I worked for federal judge Robert
Right.
Carter. He was one of the lawyers, earlier in his life, who was responsible for the Brown versus Board of Education Supreme Court
Oh,
case
okay.
that ended
Hmm.
legal segregation, school
Right.
segregation in the United States. I learned a tremendous amount from him. So, that got me started, and I was a civil rights lawyer, which is what I had always intended to be. I got to argue in the Supreme Court during the Clinton administration with the Justice Department. Uh, but I also, then during my time at the Ford Foundation, became exposed to the world of international human rights and to a world much broader than the United States. Americans, people in the United States tend to think we're the center of the universe. And sometimes you gotta, you need that kick in the pants to realize it's a broader world. And actually, the United States is a small part of it. And so I began to study and understand international human rights principles and what unites us as people around the world and what's different in different cultures and the responsibilities that large and relatively rich countries have to countries that they have historically exploited through colonialism or neo-colonialism and back with the slave trade. So that took a long time. I'm older than I look, and and I'm still learning. I'm still learning, for example, about climate change and climate justice, and how the things that we do here in the United States with irresponsible use of fossil fuels and energy have terrible ramifications in the global South, in the Caribbean, even in the southern part of our country. So it's a learning journey, to be sure.
Cool. Awesome. So once you got this ball rolling now and you start digging down and all these things you just mentioned, and you get to feel, like sometimes we say we start to get into a zone when you play ball and what have you. When you got this, did this make the whole process easier and accelerate your desire to learn as much as you can and get around as many people as you could who could help you elevate yourself mentally, not necessarily socially or academically or whatever, but just to become the best you?
Absolutely. They say the more you learn, the more you understand how much you don't know. And so the more things I got exposed to, the more I wanted to and still want to learn about different cultures and different, legal regimes and different ways of making change. One of the reasons why I co-founded the Opportunity Agenda, which is a social justice communication lab in the US, was because I traveled when I was director of human rights with the Ford Foundation. I traveled around the world and I saw what activists were doing in India and in Uruguay and in South Africa and other places. And I saw that alongside community organizing and research and legal work, communication was very important. This idea of moving hearts and minds as well as policy. And I really felt like we were not doing a good job of that, those of us who were human rights advocates in the United States. And so I helped create that organization so that we could build that muscle, so we could be better at telling our own story and at moving other people to be supportive.
Yeah, and so I was saying those things so I could get to the exact point where you transition us to, which is the opportunity agenda. I assume all of these things and exposure that you got made you, inspired you to put these ideas together and create the opportunity agenda with your partners and your co-founders. And so when we look at that, first and foremost, let's be clear for the public. What is the opportunity agenda? Because we tend to have people marching up and down and screaming and placard, and then you see the media give you all this crap on what's happening, what really isn't happening. But what is the opportunity agenda, and why is it so not successful?
Yeah, thank you for that question. So Opportunity Agenda is a nonprofit organization, so it's an NGO focused on using communication and culture to expand opportunity and protect human rights. And so the organization works with change makers, with advocates and policymakers and faith leaders and labor leaders and business and others to try to tell a more powerful story rooted in the values of opportunity and human rights. So, for example, to try to push our criminal justice system in the United States to be a more fair system, to incorporate alternatives to incarceration rather than just locking people up. And the US locks up more people per capita than any country in the world. That we should begin to infuse the value of redemption, that people can grow and change over time when you give them the opportunity to do that and the support they need. But part of that is about national will. People can nod their heads and say, yes, we ought to have fewer people in prison. But in order to get them to take action to actually change our systems, which has happened in the US over the last decade or so, to look at other alternatives, you really need to tell a story that resonates with them and talk about shared values. So, for example, I can walk into almost any room and say, when it comes to our criminal justice system, we need systems that keep everyone safe, that prevent harm, and that uphold the values of equal justice and accountability. And people will agree with that. That's my starting point. Then I can explain the ways in which our criminal justice system in the US falls far, far short of that it's discriminatory, that it locks people up for long periods of time when they could be with their families leading productive lives. And then we can start to talk about the solutions and maybe argue about the solutions, which is okay. Right. That's a part of the process.
Yeah, we had a conversation to work by the water cooler today where we were talking, and some people were saying, well, you're being political in a regulator, right? Because I'm not a regulator. And so I was saying, no, we might be being political, but we're not being partisan. And so there's a big difference, and we seem to mix up the two. Whereas, one deals with government, another one deals with different people who are fighting on either side of the big government and what have you, and so forth. So, when you created this agenda, opportunity agenda, the idea was to cause what different than what is the normal protest activism that was happening in the past.
Yeah.
Well, recent past, I should say.
Yeah. The idea was to not replace the activism that was going on, but to build on it. To add to the lawsuits and the organizing and the like. And so we focused on the news media, so getting spokespeople into the news media who could really talk in a way that would reach everyday people about why we needed changes on issues like criminal justice and immigration and economic policy, economic inequality. The organization does a lot of work with artists and creatives, because often there are people who, they might be closed down to hearing policy arguments, but they can understand a story through art. I mentioned Sidney Poitier as a good example of someone who, in the midst of the civil rights movement, he was an activist. He was also a talented artist who was portraying characters in stories that were moving people's hearts and minds, who might have been opposing civil rights, but saw a personal story that they could relate to. We did a lot of that. The organization does a lot of public opinion research to see where people are on issues of the day, and not, to just tell them what they already think, but to understand how we can meet them where they are and then move them to a place of greater support for social justice and equality. So we worked across all of those issues, and the organization is still going strong. I'm no longer on the staff. And with the idea of media, arts, and culture being a driving engine for change.
Awesome. Sidney Poitier, we talk about his activism. One of the actions that I consider to be such as when he slapped the good gentleman on the screen, I think at that point in time that was like unheard of for somebody of his complexion, being dark, slapping a white person. And I think he insisted that was in the script. I don't know how that all went, but I think that changed the mindset of people. A lot of people right then and there, either gave them confidence or whatever it is. And so you mentioned artists, because a lot of times we don't use artists or engage, I shouldn't say use, engage the creatives as such. We tend to like to deal with the highly professionals and not necessarily the side of the fence which is on the creative side. Do you all have that same experience in the United States?
We do. I think every, excuse me, every great change that's happened for the better in the United States has had as one part of it art and culture, whether it was the civil rights movement of Black folks that included Claudier and Marvin Gaye and Nina Simone and lots of other folks, lots of other performers, or the the farm workers movement in the United States, or the women's rights movement. All of those movements have been accompanied by great art and also great culture, and also artists as leaders. So, to go back to Poitier, he was an artist. He was also a spokesperson. And, not every artist is also going to, get on the soapbox and give a speech. But there is a long tradition of artists across arts traditions, musicians and visual artists and actors and others who are also spokespeople and eloquent leaders for change. And that's certainly been the case in the United States.
Yes. Now, folks, you're welcome to ask the questions as I mentioned, or give a comment on some part of history we might be talking about, or what is actually happening today in relation to what we're talking about. Please join, be a part of this discussion, and so forth. We love to have your comments. And tell us where you're calling from so we can know what it is, whether you're in Timbuktu or the Dubai or Canada, as our usual crew is be set up. Even in Ghana, we have friends down there, and so forth. So thank you all for watching in. Now, when we look at this, a lot of times we like to do things by ourselves, but you formed this foundation with Dr. Brian Smedley and also Bill Lee. What did they clone you, or they brought something different to the table? How do we go about developing something, engine like this?
Yeah, it's a great question. They most definitely brought additional skills, and we had a fourth co-founder, Phoebe Eng.
Okay.
So Brian Smedley, for example, is a well-respected doctor of social psychology, PhD in social psychology. He's worked in the policy sphere. He's worked with clients, and he's done research. And so he brought a very different mindset to the organization, that research matters, that we need to understand. For example, if we want to affect the media environment, we have to study the media environment and understand how's an issue like poverty being depicted? How are poor people being depicted in the media? And what do we think the impact of that is on audiences? So that was a very important perspective that he brought. Phoebe was an author and a patron of the arts, and somebody who really is very connected to arts traditions, and also brought this idea of fluency. This is something that she spoke about quite a bit, that we need to be able to be fluent.
Okay.
You need to go to work and be able to talk that talk, but also it's important to be able to talk the language of, I work with formerly incarcerated people who, many of whom do not have an advanced education, or immigrants whose English may not be their first language. So having that fluency to talk across communities was something she brought. And Bill Lan Lee is a phenomenal civil rights litigator who was worked as Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights in the Justice Department for a while, and he really brought kind of a hard-nosed approach of law and policy. So it was a fantastic coming together of different perspectives and skill sets.
Awesome. So, as we look at all of this now, you have artists, entertainers, other creatives, social justice leaders, advocates, researchers, communication experts, It seems like a huge ecosystem that you have going on here. Is this something that we could duplicate in other aspects of society in order to cause change?
I think it is because a lot of our expertise and partnerships at the Opportunity Agenda were not, there were some people on staff, but then we would reach out to other organizations and say, you've produced this research, can we help you to get the word out and to translate it into a language that everyday people can understand? Or, you're bringing this lawsuit to challenge an unfair practice. Let's combine it with a communication strategy so people can understand why it's unfair, and understand what the alternatives are. And I do think that is replicable in most places and parts of the world. The Bahamas is a great example where you have so many extremely well-educated people and in lots of different areas of expertise, from the social sciences to the hard sciences to business and government. And also with a passion for change. Whenever I visit the Bahamas, I'm always struck at how much of the discussion is about politics and policy. People are, always striving to be the best country that they can be. And I think, something like the Opportunity Agenda could certainly work in the Bahamas and perhaps help to contribute to an even better society.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to throw my hand in the hat to try and encourage some of the people who have plenty of energy to study your program and see if they could find ways of using what you all did for the benefit here. Because there's so many things that are in common that we have in the United States, even to the point where we have the saying here that when the United States sneezes, we catch the cold. So those I think there's been over centuries maybe. There's a lot of handshaking have been happening along the way, even to the point where the Reverend Jesse Jackson said there was a Baptist group, I can't remember the name of the group right now, they were celebrating like 100 and something years or whatever, and they were talking about the different scenarios, and he got up when he spoke and he was saying that it was Haiti that really started the revolution, the change, and it influenced neighboring countries, and then those neighboring countries influenced America, and that's how we got to the point when, as you mentioned, was a number of years later when with the slavery abolition, etc. But how let me don't say how effective, but how do you step away from all of that to go into the classroom?
It was easier than I expected. I loved the Opportunity Agenda, but it was an all-consuming job running that organization. And I was there for 13 years. And I had always intended to leave after about 10 or 11 years, because I think founders of organizations often stick around too long, and and so long that nobody else can really run the place. So I was on my way out, and then Donald Trump was elected, and so much of what we were doing was immediately at risk, and so I felt like I needed to stay for a little while longer to transition the organization, which I did. But teaching has been wonderful. Both of my parents were middle school teachers, and so I'm teaching at Harvard Law School. I love students. I love the classroom. I love the long horizon. I'm teaching students who will have maybe 30 or 40 years of active life, and hopefully something that I've taught them they'll take with them to try to make either our profession or our nation or the world a better place. So I love it. And the other thing is I have a much more flexible schedule. So I'm able to do other things. I'm writing articles and screenplays. I have a new comic book out about the insurrection that Donald Trump supporters engaged in here in the United States. And it asked the question, what if they had succeeded and overthrown American democracy? Something I never would have had time to do when I was running an organization. So it's been great. I'm really enjoying the academic life.
Yeah. So where can people get your comic book?
Well, it's actually a little hard to get because we're not yet authorized to sell
Okay.
in the Bahamas. But
Yeah.
if you folks go on Amazon and put in an order, we should be able to get it to them.
Yes. But, I mean that's probably our number one shopping engine
Mm.
that we have tend to be a lot of. Yeah. Cool. So now your parents, you say both of them taught, but didn't your mom also teach at Temple?
She taught at Adelphi. She went to Temple, so she was a
Oh, she
Temple
went to Temple.
graduate,
Mm-hmm.
and she
Mm-hmm.
taught at the university level at Adelphi University, which is out on Long Island,
Yeah.
Long Island, New York.
Right.
And
Right.
then
Mm-hmm.
and then was teaching 12, 13, and 14-year-olds, which God bless her, teaching them algebra, which was not an
Yeah.
easy thing.
Yeah, well, yeah. So I still have plenty of her stories that she used to tell, and also when you used to have to go there to visit, and the summer times was good because
Yeah,
the schools was closed, right? We got more of her time, which was good
right.
and stuff like. But you're dean at Harvard Law Schools. The John F. Manning says that Alan is one of the country's leading thinkers on the relationship between media, public opinion, law, policy, and ensuring opportunity for all Americans. How did that make you feel when he said that?
To be honest, I didn't know he had said that, so that makes me feel pretty good. We have he's an excellent dean, and they're not all excellent. So we're very fortunate to have someone who leads with wisdom and compassion, and so it's very flattering that that's his opinion of me.
Okay, cool. And in the classroom, do you get to interact with the same diversity of people that would have been when you were at the opportunity?
Mm. Yeah, it's not as diverse, the law school class and faculty. I very intentionally helped to build a team that was diverse in almost every conceivable way in terms of race and class and gender identity and people with disabilities and immigrants as well as people who were born in the United States. And the law school has done a good job, but there is definitely more work to be done. And the U.S. Supreme Court has recently struck down Harvard's affirmative action program, which is one of the tools that had helped to create a more diverse class and to expand opportunity to people who had been historically shut out. I think it was a terrible decision, but we will accept it and we'll work
Right.
within those bounds to create a new system for for crafting a diverse class and faculty.
Yeah, and so is that diversity? Is what does that do for the engines, people who trying to get something accomplished? Not necessarily in activism, but in anything.
Yeah,
How does
there's
that help?
there's a lot of research, social science research, and from the business world that shows that diverse groups make better decisions. And that makes sense because if people are coming from different perspectives and they're able to say, well, here's how we did it back home, or the people I work with, my team, would not be able to connect with this, or here are new ideas that
Right.
have come from a different community. That's going to make for a more informed decision-making process. And so there's a ton of research showing that diverse classrooms and campuses and business settings lead to better decision-making, better leadership, more profits. Simply from a marketing standpoint, you can, if you have a more diverse team throughout, you're able to communicate with and reach more diverse audiences as customers, as vendors. So lots and lots of research shows that diversity makes for better institutions and a better country and world.
Yeah. And so, do you have any specific subjects that you really more passionate about than I think you mentioned about 4 or 5 that you're teaching. Any one of those makes you want to just jump out of bed at 4 o'clock in the morning every morning just to get to class?
You know, I'm very lucky because I feel that way about all my classes, and they're all classes that I created. And so, for example, my class on race and the law
Mm-hmm.
looks at the history of race in the United States, of indigenous peoples and slavery and immigration. And then it looks at modern day problem solving. How can we use the law that we have and the laws that perhaps we should have to solve everyday problems, to keep people safe, to prevent discrimination? And it changes every year. So every year, in fact, it's this time of year, I have to look at what has the Supreme Court done, what have courts decided,
Mm-hmm.
how do I update the curriculum so that I make sure I'm giving my students the most up-to-date knowledge about the law. My other 2 classes relate more to communication and the areas in which I was working before coming to law school. And I love
Mm-hmm.
those too because they're concrete skill building. Most students can't get them anywhere else. They come in as typically, so-so communicators, and
Mm-hmm.
they almost always leave at the end of the semester as much more effective communicators, both in writing and orally and in social media. Very gratifying. And now that I've been teaching for 4 or 5 years, I'm starting to see my students out in the world, my former students out in the world,
Mm-hmm.
accomplishing great things, which is, the most satisfying thing you can have as a teacher.
Awesome. So Mark Roberts says here, the Hyder family, they're Irish and are most respectful and miss all good son. Yes. You must have a passion for the Bahamas and our legal justice systems are political controlled and not working for our youth and their future. Would you consider as a next chapter in your life to come to the Bahamas and set up a social justice opportunity network whose focus is piloting our youth to understand their role in activism and participation in bringing about social justice, change, and development? Boy,
Yeah,
that's
Mr.
plenty.
Roberts,
Yeah.
thank you for that question. I would certainly be open to it. The Bahamas is very close to my heart. And also, it's a lot nicer than the New York area where I live. And my family is there, and I would certainly be open to it, and at the very least to making a trip to have a conversation. So feel free, Mr. Roberts and anyone else who's listening, feel free to reach out, and we can at least consider the possibilities.
Yeah. So how do they reach out to you? Yeah.
So, Facebook or LinkedIn or,
Okay.
are the best ways to reach me, or the Harvard Law School website has my contact info as well.
Right. Right. Yeah. Now you mentioned from your law class that you all solve problems.
Mm.
I never know law could solve problems. How does that happen?
So,
Not to go through the whole class, but I just
right.
yeah.
So, for example, a problem that we have almost everywhere in the country is a lack of affordable housing. And so, and we have that problem throughout the United States. It's as bad as it's ever been. And so, we look at what do the civil rights laws, for example, tell us about how to address that problem. So, for example, we have some communities that refuse to have any multifamily housing, any apartment building that would be affordable to working class people disproportionately people of color. And so the civil rights laws actually say, if you're going to have a policy like that, you have to have a good justification for it. And if you don't, that policy's got to fall, and you have to allow affordable housing to be built in your community. And so as a civil rights lawyer, I worked on a number of cases that were based on that principle. And now I'm teaching my students about it. that that's not the only set of laws that are relevant, but it's an important set of laws. And the idea that if there is a discriminatory effect of a policy, that especially in housing, then it needs to be justified in particular ways. And if it can't be justified, it needs to fall. And in this instance, this example, affordable housing should be able to be built. So that's just one example of problem solving with the law.
Yeah. Well, I hope some of our activists are listening to this today, because I mean, I'm no expert on the law, but I don't remember anybody ever talking about what I call an active law, because I consider that to be an active law where it does different things for different, depending on what the situation is. That's great. That's awesome. So no more messages. Okay. So when we look at now in terms of the development or the next generation, are we developing the rising generation? I think this is something that you all had said that you all were doing before, the communications around issues of the race, justice, immigration rights, economic opportunity, criminal justice reform, etc. Are you able to continue that in the classroom?
I am. First, it's probably important to say that we have handed our young people a terrible world, full of problems to deal with that we should have solved. So, they're inheriting climate change, they're inheriting extreme income inequality. That there's in the United States a rise of white supremacy and bigotry, including by the last president, and school shootings, because we in the United States are addicted to guns in a way that is very harmful to our society. So I always apologize first. I'm sorry that we didn't fix these problems and that you've got to deal with them. And now my next task is to try to help to equip them to take on the problems that are first and foremost in their world and in their society. And those are among the ones that they're most focused on. So, I want them to benefit from my experience. I want them to benefit from the mistakes that our generation has made, and for them to bring their new ideas into the fight. And that's exciting. And one of the contributions that I try to make.
Yeah, and that's awesome, because I think if we poll our young people, they probably would say that they don't have educators doing that for them today. At least they don't experience that. Particularly when I speak with my boys and their friends, that's what they say. They in the 30 age group kind of time. Maybe the younger people have some different experience, but that's what they're saying.
Yeah.
So
here. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
You go ahead.
I was going to say in the States, in the last couple of years, including in addition to income inequality rising, we've had the murder of George Floyd by police officers and many other killings of Black and brown people by police officers. We've had school shootings, a decade now of horrific school shootings, and we have climate issues, and so our young people, my kids are about 5-6 years younger than yours. They've grown up with these challenges, and they are activists. And I find that generation is much more likely to be activists than the one that was right before them.
Yeah. Cool. So now Abraham Lincoln, excuse me. One of my favorite quotes is, he says, the philosophy, or he's credited as saying, the philosophy of the schoolroom in one generation would be the philosophy of government in the next. I don't see that happening here. I don't know if it happens in the United States, but I could see why there's so much disconnect if it don't happen. I could see why he might probably wanted to say that. You probably get more background as to what his thinking was and why he thought what he thought and what have you. But when we look at that just on the pure high level surface principle of it, then how, because you seem to have had, and you shrug it off, but that's almost like 30 years of activism, what I hear you call off so far. When I was trying to do my maths, I was good at math, but I wasn't that great in memory. That's the part I suffered
You're
from.
better at it than I am.
Yeah, yeah. But so when we look at that, then how do they be activists and develop themselves without burning down the house as they go?
Yeah, it's a great question. First, as to your Lincoln quote about the schoolroom and government, I do think there's a relationship, and it's one of the reasons. For instance, I'm guessing that a lot of your viewers are in Florida. In Florida, they're trying to outlaw the teaching of Black history and of the history of slavery and discrimination and segregation. Because they know that if young people don't know that history, then they're just going to assume that Black folks are disproportionately poor because they don't work hard or because they're not as smart as white folks, all of which we know is not true. There's a reason why they're trying to suppress that history. For that reason, we need to fight that. So I do think that's really important. But that said, I think our young folks today are growing up in an era, a lot of challenges, but some of the benefits are it's easier to find knowledge from around the world. When you and I were growing up, you had the encyclopedia and the newspaper, and those were basically and the television, your methods of learning, and somebody else was deciding what you would learn. Now, we have social movements all around the world. They are doing, Zoom lessons and webinars and, producing toolkits and materials. And so young folks have the ability to connect. They're really this is the first era of human existence where we all have the ability to communicate with others around the world and to hear back from them. And so this is a moment for them to do that. They need to be smart about it. They need to verify, am I dealing with a legitimate organization? And do they have a constituency? And are their recommendations based on facts and experience? But they have that ability to do that, and I really urge folks to do it.
Awesome, cool. So, I asked you plenty questions now. Is there anything that you want to cover that we haven't covered that you want to touch on?
Well, I would love to think about and talk about some of the challenges that connect us as countries, the United States and the Bahamas. Climate change is top of mind as something where you said, if we sneeze, the Bahamas catches a cold, and that's true, in terms of the economy and tourism and the like. It's also true in terms of climate. And so, I think those are opportunities for us to work together. There are climate justice activists in the United States, and I know there are many people in the Bahamas and throughout the Caribbean who are working on that issue. And, that's one example of where I would love to see greater collaboration. Another is immigration. How does one both have, borders with integrity and understand that humans are going to flee oppression and danger and try to get a better life for their families. And we have to be welcoming of them and respect their human rights, even as we strive to have orderly systems that follow the law and that accommodate everyone's needs. Those are both issues among many others that I think we could work together. The last one that I'll mention, because you noted that you sometimes have viewers in Ghana. Last year at this time, last August, I was at a conference in Ghana about the question of reparations. It was throughout the Africa and the African diaspora. And, there were people talking about what do the European powers, what does the United States owe to both nations, Black nations that have been exploited, and the Bahamas is certainly one of those, as is Ghana, and also people within nations, as we have in the United States, who've been exploited. I think that's a fascinating question. And I know Bahamians have been active. I remember when Prince William and Kate visited
Right.
the Bahamas and the Caribbean. They were met, some welcomes and also some demands, which I thought was beautiful. So, I hope that we can, as citizens of our different nations, we can find ways to work together on some of these problems that we share.
Yeah, cool. And Mr. Pritchard here is saying the Organization for Responsible Governance is in the Bahamas is beginning to address this challenge. Yeah, we take a hat off to you, Pritchard, so that you all could continue to go and do these great things. About a week or so, last week, Mr. Andy Ingram was on the show, excuse me, and he talked a little bit about the emancipating of the mind, and we talked about reparation, where people waiting for the reparation, but whether we could do for ourselves, not just to wait, not say not to accept it when it comes, but not to just sit back and wait for it. But the first thing you mentioned just now, you said that you would like to do. We have we watched on an earlier show, just under a month, where there was this movie called The Songs of Freedom. Yeah, and in that movie they talked about the sex trafficking of children, and that is something that the officer who was on with us, the assistant superintendent, was saying is a big challenge for not necessarily Bahamian people being sex trafficked, but foreign people being trafficked through the Bahamas and so forth. And so that is something also, if you have on your agenda, could be a great thing, because I think that's a big problem. I think she said that's the biggest problem that we have in terms of trafficking.
Yeah, and that particular film has drawn a lot of controversy, but I think the underlying problem of trafficking for all kinds of purposes, sex trafficking and child smuggling and exploitation are absolutely phenomenon that need to be addressed, and they need to be addressed both on their own and as they play out in other contexts. In the tourism industry, there's a big footprint, unfortunately, of trafficked people. In our immigration system, we need to be on the lookout for that and compassionate about it, and also recognize the trauma that comes with those experiences, and that simply saying to someone, okay, you're free now, is necessary but not sufficient. We need to make sure that people get the services they need to begin to heal and recover and be their full self.
Yeah, and when I think about that, I think of our brothers sisters down there in Haiti who come on these sloops, and the sloops are jam-packed, and they're risking their life just to get to a space of freedom. And I sort of look at that image when we see pictures of those sloops, and could only imagine what it would have been like when the slaves were brought over on those gigantic boats.
Yeah.
And how it seemed like we're just repeating what was happening way back when. Maybe some of us might be getting the rewards of it, because slavery to me was an economic thing more so than anything else. But however you look at it, it's still wrong to me in terms of you exploiting other people for your personal economic gain.
I agree. And, Haiti is a good example because, not only was Haiti, the product, or the current population, the product of cruel slavery by France, but then when Haiti won its freedom, France insisted that they pay reparations, that Haiti pay reparations to France. Excuse me. Which is just remarkable, but it's a clear example of one of the ways that Europe has underdeveloped Black nations. And then when things go wrong in Haiti, people want to shake their head and say, oh, those people can't govern themselves. Well, they were robbed again and again from the opportunity to govern themselves in a democratic and successful fashion. And especially Europe and the United States owe a great debt and have an obligation to help them right their nation.
Yeah. So Mark is saying here again, is the legislation in the U.S. being framed adequately to support and to bring about strict and effective actions to protect environmentalists and small island countries like the Bahamas? I think it's more in line with the climate change and stuff.
Right. Yeah. In my view, no. The Biden administration, our current president, has made some incremental change that I think is important, but it's not nearly enough. And the fossil fuel industry is fighting tooth and nail to prevent anything that will significantly divert us from using, petroleum products. It's a very dangerous road that they have us on. And so, again, I think there's been progress. This administration was better than the last administration, and we do have some improvements. But we are not yet on target to reduce carbon emissions sufficient to prevent irreversible climate change, sea level rise, and with devastating impact in the Bahamas and places like it. We absolutely have to turn it up to do more faster.
Yeah, well, we feel it because when it rains heavy here, areas that wasn't flooding before, granted some development is causing some of that, but on the coast, well, I guess you all consider the whole Bahamas a coast, but for us on the coast, you could see areas where the water is coming up higher onto the shore than where it was coming up before. And that's a scary thought.
Yeah, and here in the United States, in parts of the United States right now, we're literally on fire, Happy. In places like Phoenix, Arizona, 110 degrees, 115 degrees, people dying, and yet it is a struggle to get even minimal regulation passed. So, I hope that the suffering and the danger will not be in vain, that it will cause people to actually wake up and realize that they've got to take action. My co-writer of the comic book, whose name is Gan Golan, his main work right now is as a climate justice activist, and he and his colleagues have created a climate clock. You can find it on online or on Facebook, and it counts down the time that we have left to take major action in order to reverse, sea level rise, and other terrible effects. And it's supposed to be literally an alarm, right? An alarm clock and a wake up call. And the clock just flipped from 6 years to less than 6 years. So we're on the 5 year, ticking down. So we've got to do more. Absolutely.
Yeah, and then you have things like I don't know if anything is happening in the States like this, but we have in the Europeans blacklisting, and so every time we get off a blacklist, then they raise the ante or change the parameters, and so then you're back on the blacklist again, and you got to put in all these other new legalese format and stuff, but they don't seem to apply that to their own members. So I don't know how does the world address this thing other than have a war like what's happening in Ukraine and the rest, or in the East, the Far East, where we seem to we have to go to physical confrontation instead of diplomatically working things out.
Yeah, I hope it won't come to that. We certainly need to do more than we're doing.
Yeah, cool. Awesome. But this has been a great conversation, and I know we could go on probably for another 3 hours when we start talking about some other long time ago things. But I really appreciate you taking the time to share. This plane is coming over. Hope y'all can hear me. taking the time to share with us what you have been doing, and hopefully people can see another opportunity as to how they can approach their activism and the like, and maybe make themselves more efficient and so forth, that we don't have to have all of the confrontation that we have and the bickering in the newspaper the way it is done. Not saying that it will stop, but where people say you do that and then all of a sudden then somebody gets straight on the side and then it disappears. And I don't know if you all experienced that over there.
For sure. And thank you so much for having me. And I hope your viewers will take a look at www.opportunityagenda.org. That's my former organization, but has a lot of resources for social justice communication.
Awesome. And who knows, maybe sometime in the future we'll bring you back to tell us about the next step that you're going to do, because you didn't touch on what you're going to do next. So I assume that you still have that under wrap and key.
I've got to figure it out myself.
You got to figure it out. Yeah. Awesome. Well, do say hello to the family for me. All of us down here on this little rock. It's still hot as could be. I don't know what the temperature is up there, but at least today was cool. I think it was close to 100, but it was still cool. At least you had a cool tint there, so that was great.
It's good.
Awesome.
Yeah, well, please give my regards to everybody.
Will do. Thank you kindly. Folks, thank you for watching Something to Think About with Dale Happy Knowles, and we'll be here next week, same time next week, with another enlightening conversation, hopefully to help bring value to your table, and you can tell us what you would like to also hear, and we would love to share that. Don't forget to like 1,000 times, so this could reach all your friends and continue the movements that we need to move. Pause, think about your intentional thought, and consider where we go from here. See you next week. Madam Producer, thank you.